again, gals and ghouls. Welcome back to another installment in Creative Halloween, the fun creative event I'm hosting on my channel wherein I tell you spooky stories while working on my October journal, junk art journal, or just regular journal. So, for today's video, I am doing a couple pages in my Halloween junk journal that I set up in my previous video. I'm going to be completely honest here. I don't 100% feel super confident in my art journaling, junk journaling skills, but I'm going to go ahead and just attempt to play around, use up some of my Halloween stash, and just have some creative play. Alright guys, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with today's tales. I'm going to switch it up from last week, and I'm going to go ahead and just read a couple of short stories from a Reddit thread. Now, because I'm reading stories off of Reddit, some of the usernames are a little kind of hard to know how they're pronounced. So I'm just going to go ahead and either put them on the screen or give them credit down below. So yeah, with that, let's get on into the stories. The Coffin. The first time I saw it was in the funeral home, just before the church service. I was staring at the coffin, struggling to come to terms with everything. And it definitely moved. Not enough to fall off the stand or anything, just the tiniest wiggle. No one else noticed it, but I had to stifle a scream with my hands. I shook it off as just my imagination. But then, in the church, it happened again. This time, there was the slightest of creaks, and it definitely came from the coffin. I don't know how no one else heard it. Even the flowers on top shook ever so slightly. This time, I couldn't put it down to my mind playing tricks. The third time was the worst. As I lowered the coffin in the cemetery, I could have sworn there was a dull scratching sound a few seconds after the coffin touched the bottom of the grave. I could literally feel the hair on my neck stand up. Every primal instinct told me to tell someone, but I couldn't even speak. But as the grave began to be filled in, I finally relaxed and made a mental note. Next time, I would tie their hands behind their back. Mrs. Brown's apple tree. Mrs. Brown was a batty old lady, but no one in town really minded on account of her apple tree. That thing was as monstrous and ancient as Lucifer himself, and when fall came knocking, the tree groaned with fruit. When it was picking time, old Mrs. Brown called all the neighborhood kids to help. We were allowed to take a bucket home to our families, while she kept the rest for pie making. It was a good system, one we didn't question until after she died. See, old Mrs. Brown didn't have any living relatives, so when she passed, it was up to her estate lawyer to see things settled, chief of which was a property. Most of the rooms were pretty normal, filled with old lady stuff. Sewing equipment, antique china, butterscotch candy in little dishes all over the place. Seemed like it wouldn't be too hard to pack everything up and sell off. Until they got to the cellar. Wasn't as much of a cellar as a hole. A contractor who came out later said he couldn't be sure, but it seemed like it was old. Older than the house. Older than the town even. It sloped pretty far down. Couldn't see the other end. The lawyer wasn't sure it was safe, could affect the foundation and all, so he called a contractor. Contractor gets down there, his guys sets up lights, see what they're looking at, and they find roots. The cellar goes into the front yard and it hits the apple tree's roots. That would be a major problem on its own, but they found something so much worse. Bodies. A dozen bodies, bald and mummified, skin fragile and dry as paper, impaled on thick, gnarled roots, as though the tree had grown through them and over them over the years. The police were called.
911, what's your emergency?
The coroner's team entered in hazmat suits, armed with shears, ready to cut the bodies loose. The moment those scissored blades split into the roots, blood oozed from the wound. The bodies all gasped, eyes flying open, and began to scream. I follow my wife's Reddit account to anonymously give her awards. It started with me browsing the curly hair subreddit. My wife always struggled with frizz, so I lurked there to get a better idea for a hair care gift package. By chance, I saw she'd posted a selfie along with the caption, "The lion's mane behaved itself today." She was sitting across from me in the lounge, eyes fixed on her phone. I clicked on the post and gave it an award. A few seconds later, her face lit up. "Everything okay?" "Just some funny messages in the group chat." From there, I stalked her profile daily. Anytime the two of us were in the lounge, I'd award her posts and watch her smile and kick her feet around excited. This insider information helped me nail her birthday gift, a blanket made from old t-shirts which didn't fit anymore, and gave me ideas for our anniversary, dinner at a restaurant she'd asked about in our city's local sub. It felt like I'd turned on the cheat codes to our marriage. But after I lost my job, her posts took a turn. She began browsing the marriage relationship advice subs, and after 3 weeks of me bombing countless interviews, she asked for tips over on dead bedrooms. Like I needed a reminder I couldn't perform. It was hard not revealing I knew she shared intimate details about her relationship with strangers online. But if I told her, she'd just make a new account, and I'd lose my window into her innermost thoughts. Her original posts had gained some traction, which meant tons of users asked for an update. Then she posted how the situation had gotten worse. She wrote about how now I snapped over every little thing and even started lashing out. The tension continued to swell. Soon came the ultimate gut punch, a confession post entitled, "I am terrified of my husband." Can you imagine what would have happened if a Reddit user went radio silent after that bombshell? It would have caused a scandal, an investigation. Talk about your wake-up call. I calmed things down by cooking a few romantic meals and told her I was deeply sorry for dumping my frustrations on her. I even bought the damn hair care package. This made her post some positive updates. She wrote that, although we had a long way to go, things were definitely looking up, that we'd be okay. But the fact is, things aren't okay, and they'll never be okay again. Now I know what she really thinks of me. So I searched for subs she was still actively participating in, subs like this one. And then I sat down to write my first ever post. She's sitting opposite me as I type this. There's a knife under my armchair, and I already know how I'll dispose of the body. Now it's just a case of waiting for her to read my confession and realize what's about to happen. So if you're reading this, Maria, it's time to look up. Now I sit me down for tea. My niece Renee is a sweetheart. It's why I'm always down to babysit. And since my sister's a single mother, I babysit a lot. This afternoon, Renee was in her room when I arrived. Angela, my sister, gave me a quick hug. "Thank you so much. I keep telling my boss I need more notice." "It's fine. Go make that dough." Looking grateful, Angela gathered her purse and made one last stop in Renee's doorway. "Aunt Danny is here. I'll see you later tonight, okay?" Renee murmured something, and Angela hurried out the door. I knocked on the door frame before sticking my head into Renee's room. "Hey, kiddo." Renee sat on a spread-out blanket, a tea party already in progress. She blinked at me with dark, liquid eyes. "Hi, Aunt Danny," she said in the most adorable voice, and went back to pouring imaginary Earl Grey. "Mind if I join you?" Renee shook her head, so I took a seat while she set up another teacup and saucer. I noticed there was one more place set. "Who's taking tea with us?" "Helen." My blood ran cold. I knew a Helen when I was Renee's age. She died when we were in the first grade. Anaphylactic shock. Helen, huh? I said, trying to hide my unease. That's a pretty name. Yeah, Renee said. She set down the teapot and picked up her cup, pretending to sip. She's been telling me about you. Renee had always been imaginative, but she'd never said something like that before. What'd she say? That you were best friends a long time ago. Renee poured more tea into Helen's cup, pausing to nod at the empty space. She has a question. My mouth was dry. What? She wants to know why you did it. Renee turned to me, her big brown eyes sad. Renee, why don't we play something else? We could play Candyland. You knew she was allergic. Her mom told the whole class. The smallest amount could kill her. Even residue on someone's hands. She couldn't know. It wasn't possible. No one knew. I hadn't meant to hurt Helen. It was a day after Halloween, and peanut butter cups were my favorite. So I snuck one in my backpack to eat at recess. I hadn't realized how bad it would be. I was only 6 years old, for Christ's sakes. Tea time is over, I said, rising. Come on, let's go watch a movie. The door swept shut with an audible click. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I'm sorry. I turned to find Renee crying. I didn't want to, Aunt Danny, but she said someone had to pay. It's only fair. And she's been waiting so long. MAID services. I hope when we look back, we remember we asked for this. My wife spoke bitterly, shattering the silence. It had started off altruistically enough, of course. Medically assisted death was a right, and after much debate, our government allowed doctors to begin assisting in death, as well as life. The next few months, there were articles filled with stories of people passing peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. Some of the pressure was relieved on the overburdened hospitals, and as assisting with death was cheaper than assisting with life, there were more funds available to care for those who needed it most. People were happy. They could be present in planning their funerals, have their affairs tidied up, then schedule their death. It took out all that uncomfortable unknowing. Requests from the terminally ill poured in. The government announced the formation of a public-private partnership with a company called the Compassion Collective. They began at first in hospitals, but quickly, Medical Assistance in Death, MAID, services branched out to open their own clinics. Just as quickly, the advertisements came. Everywhere you looked, there were those who were dying with dignity and choosing to pass painlessly rather than burdening their families and the system that cared for them. It struck the right nerve with people. After all, who wants to be a burden? Within a few years, the legislation changed to offer MAID services to anyone with a chronic health issue. Then again to anyone who desired to do so. After all, who are we to refuse? It seems selfish. A few years in, MAID services began to be aggressively pitched to the homeless in shelters as well. Veterans were given the option in place of long-term care. Parents were able to end the lives of disabled children. Finally, the government put legislation in place for MAID services for prisons. It made sense at the time, of course. These people burdened the systems, and by now, we hated burdens. They were shipped to the MAID facilities by the busload. I can remember seeing their faces pressed against the glass. I can also remember turning away. Now the hospitals have started closing down some departments, citing lack of use. That's okay though. Those who have terminal illnesses are automatically referred to MAID services. They send out your scheduled appointment in advance to give you time to clear up your affairs. Isn't that kind? I got the news 2 days ago. Lung cancer, stage 4. I'd been having problems since last year, but couldn't get into a hospital to check it, and now it's terminal. We sit quietly by the door. I can't look at her, so I stare at my hands. The knock comes, and I kiss her goodbye. It's considered inefficient now to go to the MAID facility. I don't look her in the eyes before I go. I feel ashamed. When I supported these changes, I never assumed that I would end up a burden too.